I think we can get going.
Let's do it.
So, my name is Morten Elvang. Welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group. It's a real pleasure to welcome Mike from South Africa, who is joining us today. And I know Mike, Mike and I met just a few minutes ago for the first time. Of course, we have been talking online, but you were recommended to me by Klaus as one of his close associates. And I was hunting Klaus a long time to be part of this series. So I'm really happy that we can have the Flight Level Academy represented, or the flight levels represented. So looking forward to hearing your story. And we will do this the normal time, so 30 minutes for you, Mike. You warned that you might go a little bit over, and that's totally okay. And then whatever is left in the full hour for questions and debate. Is that okay?
Perfect. Yeah, I hope not to be talking for a full hour because that maybe put people to sleep.
Very well. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, good to be here. And perhaps just before I get going, I just want to apologize in advance if my look doesn't match my profile picture, since this is our first date. But as 2025 rolled on, I decided to stop fighting gravity and just shave my head. So, so you've got the new sharp mic. All right. I'm going to share my screen and see what happens, and then reconfigure my window so I can still see you folk. Um, Yeah, and feel free if you want to drop questions as I'm going in the chat. I may or may not answer them in full swing, but otherwise, as Morten said, we can chat once I'm done downloading onto you. All right. So another thing is that I don't rate myself as one of the world's greatest strategists. And, but I still sleep at night because I don't think that there are that many people who are in that category. Um, and yeah, so for the rest of us, maybe that's what this session is about. And I, yeah, so I'd like to tackle the topic of strategy, at least from the perspective of the experiences that I've had in organizations um, in all sorts of countries. And yeah, the organizations that want to improve the way that they are articulating, disseminating, and delivering or realizing strategy. So I'll take you through some of the thoughts that I have on this, and also how I believe the flight levels, using flight levels thinking, we can really improve the status quo. All right, so let's get started. I thought it pertinent to consider what isn't, or what is or isn't strategy, and why is this important in organizations? Why is strategy perhaps important to organizations? So I created a list of shoulds. Strategy should. And actually, the first point Dave Anderson spoke about last week, he said something along the lines of, we're operating under the assumption when it comes to strategy that we actually want the business to survive. And I'd go a step further and say survive and flourish, right? So maybe survive is the MVP, but yeah, hopefully the strategy should enable us to survive and flourish. It should also be explicit, visible, executable, and measurable. And what do I mean by all those words? I mean, essentially, that we, the people in the organization that are somehow involved in either defining strategy or executing on it and delivering results, are all able to see and understand the strategy in such a way that when we're doing things, we can actually get a measurable sense of, are we doing stuff that's actually moving us towards the goals? Um, And then, of course, there's the sense of shared purpose. I mean, if you consider Dan Pink's work on the surprising truth that motivates us, one of the pillars there is purpose. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So for self-motivation, purpose is important. And if we've got shared purpose, then at the very least, we're probably going to have a lot more generative conversations about how we can contribute, to the goals. And that for sure is going to lead us towards making better decisions together. So strategy should really create or also guide decision making. It creates a bit of a frame for the organization and the people in it. And once we've made decisions, we need to take coherent action. And I use the word coherent over the word alignment. I don't think it's very worthwhile spending a lot of time trying to get everyone perfectly aligned, because A, it'll never happen, and B, it takes a lot to do that. So I'd much rather, that we were able to look out across what everyone is doing and be able to see the logic between what they're doing and where we're headed. So if everyone's kind of coherently moving in a direction that's supporting the desired outcomes, then that's great. And probably it's even more resilient that way than if everyone was perfectly aligned. That would be a good recipe for we all go over the cliff together. So yeah, I'm more into coherent actions. And yes, so we also want to have strategy creates the possibility for creating and maintaining focus. I always say the opposite of focus is perhaps trying to do all the things at the same time and achieve all the results at once. And that just sounds like chaos to me. And, from my experiences around and seeing it happening like that, I can tell you for sure it is chaos. So, the opposite of that is gaining the ability to create focus and get stuff done. Sounds a lot nicer and healthier. And then this last one around feedback loops and evolution of strategy, I think is often missed. I see a lot of organizations that are defining strategy annually. There's a big hoo-ha, and here's the strategy, and then it's cast in concrete for the next 12 months or more. And yeah, this despite the fact that things are changing in the market or in the environment in which we work, or so it doesn't feel very good. Rather, I'd make sure that the strategy has feedback loops back from operation and implementation, so that we can evolve the strategy itself. It should be a living, breathing beast, right? And then I would go as far as to say that if we're not getting these things from our strategy, then we probably don't really have a strategy, or there's some other problems. And I'd ask myself, well, are we able to even answer the question, why are we doing what we're doing, and where are we going to end up? And probably not if we don't have all of these things in play. So yes, it would be good to have these attributes when we think about strategy. So WTF with strategy, which of course stands for why the failure. So where is strategy failing, and what's making this happen? And I think there are often a lot of misconceptions about what is strategy in the first place. Well, we've got a plan for the next year. It's detailed. We're going to do that. That is not strategy. That's just a plan, right? Oh, well, we've got this list of projects that we want to get done. That's not strategy either. Or we've got KPIs and OKRs or some other, call it what you like, measurements and so on. And that's also not really strategy in my book. There's a lot more to it than that. And last but not least, the company strategy PowerPoint is also probably not a great strategy. To belabor this point a little bit, I worked with an organization in North America for a few seasons, and they were on the cusp of next round funding. So, of course, they had their McKinsey-generated company strategy PowerPoint document. And I looked at this and just thought, wow, who on earth is going to read 220 whatever page or slides of this PowerPoint presentation and be able to make sense of all of it? The other problem is the way that this information was digested, and certainly it's not only in that company where I've seen it, but typically there are people who have their set of slides. So there's maybe only a few people in the organization that even have access to this document. And then they sit around a table and each person reports on their set out of the slide deck. So the problem with this is, well, there's so many problems with this. But cognitively, it's very difficult to understand from a bunch of slides what's going on, what the strategy is, because you've kind of got to, you can only see one slide at a time as told by one person at a time. So you've kind of got to memorize all the slides to understand the context of the slide you're now looking at. So it's not a very easy thing to do, and probably there are more effective ways of doing this. However, I'm not saying these things are evil. In fact, probably these things are quite necessary, many of them, right? And useful. But in and of themselves, they are not what I would call strategy. So rather, I think of strategy as a combination of the stories that we tell ourselves about the market, about our company, about the product, about the whatever, that inform the outcomes that we want to achieve, together with the high-level flight items or the high-level work that we believe is going to get us there and to achieve those outcomes. So you'll notice that stories, outcomes, and flight items are highlighted there, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get into it in a little bit. But yes, so that for me is probably closer to encapsulating what's the scope of strategy. Then one of the biggest challenges that I see in organizations is this. So, the company has a great strategy or the product has a great strategy, but of course it's useless if we aren't able to realize the strategy or to test it or to implement it, and move the needle on things. And this is primarily due to there being this disconnect, this big void between those that are, maybe we can call them, they've got, I don't know if it's an international term, but the business. There are these people in the business, and then there are people in delivery, and there's this great void between them. And unless we're able to, I would much rather be in a company that has an okay strategy rather than a great strategy. They've got an okay strategy, but they're really, really good at bridging the gap between the strategy and the execution in such a way that we can iterate rapidly over and realize the strategy and realize where we're falling short and make adjustments. I'd much rather live or work in a company like that than one that has the best strategy but no way to execute it. So here's what I normally see in companies, or very often I see this. And for sure, time is marching on relentlessly, whether we're ready for it or not, right? And guess what? Everyone is working on stuff. Everyone is busy. Everyone is frantic. I was going to say with hair on fire, but I don't have any, so maybe it burnt off. Anyway, everyone's busy. And then begrudgingly, everyone is called into the town hall meeting because we are going to announce the strategy. So over the space of somewhere between 45 minutes and 90 minutes, the strategy is announced. And, you know, and everyone is told everything that's deemed important about the strategy. For sure, it wasn't generated in that amount of time. It took much longer, right? But anyway, here it is. So now everyone's been told, everyone understands, right? Great. Maybe, maybe not. But one thing's for sure, as soon as that meeting is finished, everyone's back to what they were doing before, because there are deadlines, there are commitments, there's all the stuff that people continue to work on, and very quickly the strategy is forgotten, if it even was understood in the first place. So yeah, so everyone's busy, and then guess what? Ooh, end of the year is coming up. And we know what that means. We're going to have to be reporting back on what we've been up to. So what we do is we create a strategy fulfillment PowerPoint presentation, and we take the laundry list of all the stuff that we've worked on and try and find ways to map it back to how it contributes to the strategy. Now, I don't know about you, but this does not feel like a useful strategy execution. In fact, it's more like we're using strategy to try and justify the stuff retrospectively that we were doing. So this doesn't feel very, very honest or useful, maybe. Rather, if we spent a little time thinking and just changing the focus here a little bit around strategy as an active driver, then we might improve things somewhat. So I think about strategy at different time horizons, and bear in mind what I haven't said yet is, of course, that strategy has many different scales, right? So I could have a personal effectiveness strategy. Our team could have a strategy to improve. A product can have strategy. An ecosystem of products could have a strategy. The company could have a strategy. A company's part of a group, and the group has strategy. So you can see how it's kind of like an onion. There are just all these different layers, but each layer has or is welcome to have strategy. Anyway, so if we're thinking about strategy actually driving the efforts and guiding the efforts, then we've probably got a sense of, on the long-term horizon, there's, and it might even be like perennial business outcomes, stratospheric stuff where we'd love to be. And so we have these long-term outcomes, and for sure we're going to need some kind of strategy in order to move towards those. Now, part of that strategy is probably to disaggregate the long-term outcomes, slice it up into mid-term outcomes and short-term outcomes. And you know, one of the things here about mid and short-term outcomes, they should be connected. So the mid-term outcomes, it should be clear how they are contributing towards moving the needle on the long-term outcomes. The short-term outcomes, same thing. They should be moving the needle on the mid-term outcomes. But this is a way of creating lineage or traceability through as we get closer to now, as we get closer to the work. And of course, guess what? The next thing is we need coherent actions, right? So probably we're looking at the shorter term outcomes and deciding what to do about it. Um, Now, one thing's for certain. The thing that I know the least about is the future. And I believe this is so for all of us, unless you've got that crystal ball. The future is intangible. So, at best, when we're planning things out ahead and envisaging where we want to be in the future, at best we're kind of guessing, or maybe we even have some statistical probabilities of where we're going to be, but we don't know, right? And so while we're acting here, probably what we want to be thinking about is every time we do something, we measure what is the impact on the short-term, mid-term, long-term outcomes, and we learn from that. And the benefit of doing that is we can then adapt. And when I say adapt, everything is fair game. We could adapt what we're doing. We could even adapt the strategy and the outcomes. And I'm not saying every month we should be changing our outcomes and replacing them with something new. It's probably not that, but at the very least, there might be a tweak here or a tweak there. And that will help us stay on track and form the path ahead, rather than just be a slave to what someone thought about a year ago would be the right thing, right? So this is the cycle that the feedback cycle I was talking about earlier, where we've got essentially the operations or the execution feeding back into the strategy, and that creating adaptations and feeding back into the actions again. All right. So this is something we've got to really keep alive if we want to increase chances of success. So then there's the PowerPoint. You might be guessing I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, but we probably want to break free from PowerPoint and somehow do a better job of making the strategy delivery or the strategy execution explicit, a real working document. So before I maybe show how we think about this with flight levels, I'm not sure what the general kind of knowledge is on flight levels. So I thought I'd just give you a very quick taste of what it is, what I understand it to be. All right. So in essence, what we're trying to do is, so first off, flight levels is not another framework. It's not another SAFe or LESS or Scrum or Kanban or whatever. Rather, it's an approach. It's a way of thinking. It's a lens that we can put over whatever it is that we're doing in the organization, where we're effectively focusing on building cross-team delivery capabilities, because we know that in most situations, you don't have a single team sitting in a single department that is able to generate value on their own, right? So we know that there's multiple teams involved in delivery in value generation. So we want to build this capability and make it smooth and easy. We also want to focus on connecting strategy to the operations. So what I've been talking about, like how do we actually connect those two worlds and get rid of that gap that usually sits between them, as well as looking at organization-wide collaboration. So, in classic kind of agile methods and so on, we're very focused on software developers and software development and maybe a bit of product development. But when you start throwing marketing and legal and and whoever else in there, it starts getting a bit more complicated, right? So we want organization-wide collaboration, not like everyone in the organization is working on the same thing. That would be, in many cases, a crazy idea, but rather that the relevant people are working on the right stuff at the right time. And that's really the goal. it's not a blueprint, so there's no, sadly, if you want, like, here's the Spotify model, or here's the blueprint to install into your organization, then you're going to be very sad looking at flight levels. But rather, we're trying to figure out where in the organization we need to do what in order to get the results that we want. And we do this by establishing 5 activities on 3 flight levels in the organization. And those activities are as follows. We want to define and measure outcomes. We want to, hopefully it's clear why we'd want to do that, right? We need to know why we're doing something in the first place. So defining and measuring outcomes is a good way of agreeing on what's relevant for us to achieve. We want to visualize what's currently happening in the organization or the piece of organization that we're looking at. And we want to make it visible. Then once we can see the work and how it's happening, we want to create focus, because in most instances, as soon as we visualize stuff, we realize, holy cow, we're trying to do everything at once. We've got chaos, right? So we want to create focus. And then we want to establish agile interactions. And I'll explain this a little more in a moment, but essentially, when I talk about a flight level system or a work system, I'm thinking about there's some kind of visualization of the work that we can look at. There are the people involved in that work, and there are the interactions that those people have about the work. And those 3 things, the board, the people, and the interactions, are what I mean together as a work system. So these interactions are defining the kind of topics and so on that we're talking about and when. And of course, once we've done all this stuff, it's probably a good idea to improve. And you can see another cycle going here. We're trying to constantly improve and learn from what we've been doing. And we want these same 5 activities at each of the 3 flight levels. And to explain what the flight levels themselves are, we think about, I think about this, there's 3 different kind of problem-solving domains. And the one that's probably usually the best understood are teams. So, there's a team, they've got some kind of a working board, they're working on stuff and they're collaborating within their team. Great. The problem is we've got many teams required in order to get value out the door. So by the way, the teams are at flight level 1. So this is operational level. It's where the real work is happening. Because there are multiple teams, there's suddenly this need to coordinate. So for example, over here, we've got maybe a product or a service or something like this. And there are multiple teams required in order to get value out the door. So there's the need for collaboration and coordination of the work that they're on. So ideally, we want these teams or the people who are in need of coordination to help design this board, right, or this system. Okay, so flight level 2 is all about solving the problems of coordination across multiple teams. It could even be across multiple products or services or things like that, right? And when I say that, this board in the middle kind of feels like a portfolio system because there's multiple other products and services perhaps in here. It feels higher up in a hierarchy, right? But that doesn't suddenly mean it's flight level 3. The problem we're trying to solve is coordination, so it's a flight level 2 system. And then, of course, there's the need for strategy. So we have a flight level 3, which is the strategic level. And again, something that's a misinterpretation of this particular illustration is it looks pretty much like we could put the org chart over this, right? So here's our C-level people at the top, and here's our middle management in the middle, and here are the teams at the bottom. Great. So if you're looking at like that, that's not the intention at all. Rather, this is an operational view of the company. The only thing that is likely to fit one-to-one with the org chart are the teams. Above there, there's so many ways to restructure a company, right? And none of them are right. So what I love about the flight levels is we can have this virtual structure on top of it, which gets people from different areas collaborating around a single purpose, and in line with a particular strategic outcomes. And these lines in between with the arrows, those are suggesting there are interactions needing to take place between levels, right? And these are some of the agile interactions that I was referring to earlier. It's kind of like Russell Ackoff's statement, right? It's not about the sum of the parts, but the product of the interactions of the parts. Well, that's what these are about, and that's I guess the really interesting part. But okay, enough on flight levels. So this just gives a little bit of a sense. So the only hierarchy, by the way, in this that I see, it's not about people and reporting, it's about work breakdown. Big stuff at the top, getting broken down into smaller stuff and disseminated across more areas, and then breaking down again and getting disseminated across more areas here. So there's a work breakdown for sure happening across this. That's the only hierarchy in this. Okay, so what are we currently doing with flight levels in terms of strategy? So again, I mentioned flight level 3 is where we're really focusing on strategy. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago, we looked on Amazon and we did a search for books on strategy in the business category. We found over 50,000 results for books, right? So, yeah, with flight levels, we don't want to add another one. I think there's enough. We don't want 50,001 books on strategy. It feels like there are enough right now, and maybe there's a different problem to solve. So we don't prescribe in any way how you develop your strategy. For sure, there is something already happening around how it's developed. And there are many great tools out there and templates, canvases. See, Morten started a canvas, best strategy canvas competition today. So yeah, so that exists and we welcome all of that. But really what we want to do is take existing strategy and figure out how to connect it cleanly into operation land so that it can be realized and that we can track and pivot and persevere as we go along. So that's what we're trying to do with flight levels. So we created this interface, if you like, for strategy. So I mentioned stories, outcomes, and flight items. So the stories, or SOFI, right, is the acronym. The stories provide context, right? So that, why these outcomes? How did we come to these outcomes? What else do you need to know about these outcomes? Are what stories are about. So there are a number of examples here of the kinds of things, but not limited to these kinds of things: business models, Wardley maps, vision, mission, all of those kinds of documents might lend themselves to creating some enabling constraints around and adding context to outcomes. Then the outcomes themselves are around having quantifiable results that we want to achieve. So again, as an organization, if that's the level of the scale of strategy, or as a product, if that's the scale of strategy, and so on. By the way, the same concepts apply no matter what the scale. So if you're a one person, you could use these concepts, or if you're a 300,000 person organization, you can still use these concepts. So the outcomes, again, existing artifacts that are lying around maybe somewhere in your document repository, might be things like strategic goals, outcomes, KPIs, key results, these kinds of things. But none of these, the stories and the outcomes, are not about how. This is all about what and why, right? The flight items is where the actual implementation or the delivery work happens. So these are the items that become in flight that we want to see moving through a process. So the flight items are things that we would want to do in order to achieve the outcomes, right? Or move towards the outcomes. So these could be things, if we're talking about a large-scale strategy, they could be corporate actions, strategic initiatives, projects, portfolio epics, programs, things like this. But they're actual chunks of work that are represented. So great. So what we actually do is we like to look at what are the artifacts that currently exist in the organization strategy. We map them to, is this a story? Is this an outcome? Is it a flight item? And we try and separate those things. And usually we find gaps. And that's kind of cool because then you can fill the gap where necessary. And then we want to make this whole thing explicit. Now, many of us have probably seen things like Kanban boards and so on before. Strategy is a little different because strategy is not, it's not like linear, it's not flowing through a process. It's more around where we want to be at some point in the future. That doesn't flow. So what we've got here is, and don't crane your neck or strain your eyes, I'll zoom in a moment. But what we've got here is one example of how a flight level 3 board might look, right? And some of the kinds of elements on it. So,
Mike, we need to observe time just a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm close. Okay, very quickly. So we've got the outcomes at the different horizons here. And so these are, guess what? In the SOFI, they are outcomes, right? So we've got long-term, mid-term, short-term outcomes. And the colors here in this representation mean that these short-term outcomes are linked to and contributing towards that mid-term outcome and ultimately to this long-term outcome. Okay, so there's also some things on the quadrant here. There's progress because we've got measurable outcomes. We actually can see this moving to the right as it gets more and more achieved, right? And there's a confidence along the vertical axis where, you know, how confident are we that we're still going to achieve this? So it just gives us the sense of a bit of movement of outcomes. Down below, we've got some stories, right? So all of these kind of, so a Wardley map and some indicators that are all speaking towards some of the outcomes up there, and some extra context around the green outcomes, right? And on the right, we've got this realization section, right? So this is where flow begins. These are strategic topics or initiatives that are, again, color-coded to link to these outcomes on the short-term outcomes here. So what I love about this, one last little thing to mention, because strategy is not linear, we've often got new ideas coming in, right? So we need a landing place for those. And that's essentially what this is on the top. So there's a place where we can start considering things that are still very far away and things that are maybe becoming more important, and when do we want to bring them in? Okay. But what I love about this thing is that it, like, at a glance, we can see more than we probably could have digested from the PowerPoint, Right. So there might be references here going into really detailed slides and so on, but we can see an operational view of the strategy. This is a real example of a company that's connecting outcomes to the work that they're doing. So this is essentially their company portfolio wall. The items on here are initiatives of 90 days or less. And on the left-hand side of the board, there are things like capacity, KPIs, strategic goals, and so on that are all linked to the cards here. And they've got a simple policy. A card may not, an initiative may not move over validation unless it is attached to an outcome, a measurable outcome. And right at the end of the process, once they've finished implementation, it goes into measure success. So there's this kind of closing of the loop there. And if it doesn't meet the success criteria, they can kind of stop what they're doing here and tweak it. And if it's still not cutting the mustard, as they say, they actually remove it from their product, which is really cool. It reduces the amount of unwanted stuff. Total summary of all of this, just so you can see a little bit of how it works in action. Let's say we've got flight level 3 up here. We've got some strategic artifacts and some indicators over here, along with a bit more like flight level 2 high level coordination happening here. So we've got initiatives, and we want to start the first initiative. Now down below, we've got a flight level 2 system, which could be one of many. And below that, we've got 3 teams. So when we want to start this initiative, it moves in flight, and it's copied onto the flight level 2 system and then split into epics in this example, right? When the epic wants to start, the epic is copied onto the relevant team boards and split into, in this case, user stories, right? And then the teams start working on the user stories, and when the last user story is complete, the epic moves with it, and we clear up over here, right? They move, and the idea is when the green team must be testing, right? They're last. And when the last epic is ready to move, then the initiative can move with it. There's a feedback loop back up here, and the initiative move here. And then hopefully we've moved the needle. So this gives you a sense of how it actually works in practice. And then, yeah. So closing thought, we want to make strategy explicit, visible, executable, and measurable. We want to design strategy and coordination systems collaboratively. We don't want them just handed down to people. We want to visualize the key strategic artifacts that already exist, probably, Sophie, all in one place so that we can actually see what's going on, and explicitly connect the flight items of the work to the strategy and the outcomes. And ultimately, we want to inspect and adapt. So that's it. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mike.
I went over, yeah.
I always appreciated you warned us. Maybe I could have been a bit better at helping you. It's all okay. I wanted to ask you one thing before we let it completely open. How have you seen, or have you seen anything change to the notion of strategy? I mean, in working with the flight levels over the years, is there something changing around that topic, or is it pretty much like it always has been in your view?
So I think it's different from organization to organization. For sure, there are new things coming, and not everyone's doing it, right? So, so there's some dinosaur organizations, often in government and things like this, that are not doing a lot different. They're still very much in the dark ages in this country anyway. And I think I've met a number of really enlightened CEOs and executive people who have really started realizing that less is more in terms of things that we're chasing. So instead of having instead of having our usual 15 strategic themes, we're going to reduce it to 5 and try and do those well. So, yeah, but yeah, and I guess from a flight levels perspective, there's a lot more interest in this approach. It's for sure, it's still relatively new in terms of what's out in the market. So, yeah. But I don't know about like everyone started going in this direction. I haven't seen that.
Thank you. Let's open it up. Any questions for Mike? I have one. I really liked how you described that there could be multiple strategies and a lot of the terminology around it. How do you integrate across strategy context? I mean, how do you make all these strategies add up together? And listening to your presentation, there's a pretty much like in the highest level, there's one strategy ruling the all. You put words to multiple strategies working together. How is that jigsaw puzzle playing out? Sorry, my words. I don't know how you would word it.
Yes,
I'm interested to know about the dynamics.
I think I understand. So, I mean, the kind of scale of strategy, right? So there's this onion of various scales of strategy, all needing to interweave and work together somehow. I mean, if you take a company like Lufthansa, they are quite big and they're a group. I mean, there are many companies within the group, and they might at the group level have an outcome to reduce carbon emissions, for example, right? So that's a group level thing. For sure, each of the companies, there may be a food, like a catering company versus a petrochemical company versus whatever. They're very different companies. So they can all inherit reduced carbon emissions as part of their strategy, but they will also append what is their company strategy. So, and the same within a company, there might be org strategy and product strategy. So where relevant, we inherit org strategy into our board, and we add our strategy together with that. So that's kind of how to get the traceability and the execution thereof. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does. So that's like a coordination among level trees across the organization.
Kind of. It's inheritance. So a higher or a larger FL3 items from there will be inherited onto smaller FL3s. Yeah.
Let's open it up, Inem.
Yeah, I have probably the opposite question.
Right.
What happens if you work on in a really small organization where, I don't know, there are kind of 7 people or I don't know 10 people of you, and but I guess you still have to have all those levels, not all of them, but maybe some of them, and ideally you should kind of distinguish kind of levels of thinking. But still, probably most of the people have to jump and or have to reason on at least 2 levels, or maybe all 3 of them. Do you see any challenges here? How it's maybe you have some like stories from practice.
For sure. I mean, so first off, just because it's a 7-person company doesn't make it somehow less complex, right? I mean, it is for sure, but also it's complicated. So in that example, I would probably just have a single board which has all the company stuff on it. And it would probably there's not need for much coordination because with 7 people, you're coordinating daily with each other anyway. Right. So there's probably more a need for how are we managing our work, flight level 1, and what's driving where we're going next, flight level 3. So you probably don't need flight level 2, and you could have both flight level 3 and 1 on the same board if you wanted to. And then, as you say, it's kind of like, okay, we maybe once a month or something, we're going to sit down to work on strategy. And then we put our strategy hats on and we do that. And the rest of the time, we're focusing primarily on the work portion of the board. So I don't know if that helps. I mean, essentially, we can simplify the whole thing down. You don't need to have like masses of boards and meetings and whatever if you're smaller. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Very well.
Cool.
Igor?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Mike. I think Flight Levels, it's a really amazing framework. I'm really interested in. At the beginning of the session, you were talking about the gap that exists, from the strategy or between the strategy and the execution.
Mm-hmm.
And when you showed us the 3 levels, I was thinking if the second one, the coordination one, it's one of the ways Flight Levels use to reduce this gap. Am I right?
Exactly true. Which is often why, if I'm looking to help improve things in an organization, I often start there at Flight Level 2, because it's really bringing those 2 worlds together collaboratively. If we're doing it right, anyway. So yes, for sure, it's Flight Level 2 and coordination is probably the key thing. Usually, whatever's on that board is sitting in a project manager's head, right, or a portfolio manager's head, and usually they're looking very, very stressed. So yeah,
it's like a translator, right, between 2 words.
Yeah.
Okay. And a second one, when you were talking about the horizons, you showed, the strategic outcomes, timeline or something like that, or different approaches, 1 year, 3 years, 3 months. When you were talking about the horizons, what kind of horizon are you talking? The innovation horizons, or which horizon are you talking?
Yeah, look, I think so. For different organizations, different types of domains, these, long term could mean something very different for a massive financial institution with millions and millions of customers. I've seen, in fact, a board of one of the South African banks. They've got 25 years is where it's what they call long term. But and if you're a small company, startup or something, maybe 6 months is long term. So I think it needs to be applicable to the domain you're working in. Yeah, so most typically what I see is a lot of organizations are working either in quarters or every 4 months, right? They've got a cycle going already. I would probably see that cycle as being the midterm or the short term for those kinds of organizations. So if it's a 3-month cycle, that's probably the short term, 90 days. A year being midterm, maybe, and 2 years or 3 years being long term. Maybe it's just a rough guess heuristic, but certainly not a rule. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what the name is, but Business Agility Institute.
We'll call him Bob.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to rename myself, but I'm not representing the Institute, but rather, first of all, thanks, Mike, and thank you, Morten, for allowing me to join the meetup tonight. Mike, you do a great job of presenting and explaining things in a very clear and concise way. Time management is another thing, but and for not being a fan of PowerPoint, you should create some beautiful slides, but you probably use another tool. One thing that my question now, I was curious about you talked about the agile interactions, and those are the feedback loops to then go back and check, are we doing is the strategy going the right direction or not? And that's kind of missing. Other frameworks, as we know, are more prescriptive about when those conversations take place. Do you have any examples, or do you have any suggestions of when those interactions, when should the reverse arrows go back up to challenge the strategy and say, well, we're going in the wrong direction, or where we should pivot now?
Yeah, great question. I mean, and it's Greg, by the way. We've met. So
I'm sorry, Greg Keegan. We were formerly colleagues, and I like the look. You look a lot like Morton. I think he did it on purpose.
Yep. Yeah. So Greg, the interactions are certainly one of the most important parts, right? And the reason that we're not prescriptive on it is because there isn't a right way to set up your interactions. There's an effective way in your organization to do it. So the way that we work is, for example, at a coordination system, we categorize the types of interactions that are probably needed. And bearing in mind, an interaction is not a meeting, not necessarily. So rather, we look at what types of exchanges of information need to take place. So it might be, we need to improve. So we have an improvement interaction. We also have an interaction where we can sync. So there are a couple of interactions that might be very focused on a specific column on the board. For example, if we're planning the next quarter, for example, that might be an interaction where we're very focused on a particular column where cards are waiting. And the cadence of those interactions is determined by the people and what they're currently doing and what would be helpful. So, yeah, it's a very meta way of answering your question, because there isn't So I mean, in the courses or in the workshops that we run, we bring out this information from the people about their own systems. So but the interactions between levels, again, depending on company and so on, we need to strike a cadence. So I'll just use the quarterly, the classic quarterly cycle. If there's a quarterly cycle in your business, then latch onto that, because I haven't seen many instances where the strategy is evolving quarterly and there isn't a quarterly delivery cycle attached. If there's already a cycle there, then probably there are a bunch of interactions happening at the boundaries of the existing cycle, and some peppered along the way in between. So I haven't given you the perfect answer, because there isn't one. But hopefully it's enough to give you an idea of the intention.
And I thought you were going to tell me to buy the book.
I could tell you to do that. Yeah.
That would be perfectly okay.
No, thank you.
I have one of them. It's some great illustrations. We are approaching the top of the hour. Thank you so much. And Greg, apologies for not recognizing you. I should have done that. But better safe than sorry. Mike, anything we can do for you?
No, I think you've already given me everyone's time. Everyone's given me their time, so that's enough. Thank you.
Will your slides be available?
Again, Greg?
Will you make your slides available?
Oh, yes, I forgot to ask.
I can for sure, yeah.
Please do.
Yeah, so I'll send them, Morten, to you, and you'll...
Absolutely, a link or a copy, whatever is more convenient. Yeah. The smallest possible, and then I will distribute you. Okay. And Mike, I really appreciated your entry today in this Canvas question, where I was asking what's the representation of of strategy? Is there a form? And I realized that was maybe not the way to ask. And you actually hit it quite well. So Mike sent an empty canvas. And that seems to be the general sentiment, is that there are a million ways how you can do that. So just going with the blank page is not too bad. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mike.
Cool. Pleasure, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. So hope to see you all soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Adios.
Thank you.
Gracias. Bye.